Hey everyone, welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This week, the portion of Vayeishev. Our focus this week is jealousy. One of the things I mentioned when we started this cycle was that we might begin to focus on some of the more negative, let's call them emotions or attributes and things that we can improve on and work on. And as much as I am certainly not a psychologist or in any way a therapist of any sort, when we're dealing with coaching, there are a lot of negative emotions and a lot of negative mindsets that people have around a lot of very important issues that effectively become blockages and become bottlenecks in their ability to improve, their ability to change, their ability to achieve the things that they want to achieve in life. And one of them that's rather debilitating is jealousy. And it's a super important subject to discuss. Of course, as though is the case that Coaching with the Bible is the beginning of the conversation on these subjects and not the full expansive version of a subject. We simply can't get there in a short period of time. But this week I wanted to delve a little bit into the concept of jealousy because it comes up in this week's portion. We begin to read about the interaction, the relationship between the brothers, the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes, and how that goes. As much as we've seen a little bit of them last week in their work with the destruction and killing of Shechem and Hamor and that entire population of people as vengeance, retribution for their sister Dinah, the story here really fully now shifts completely from Jacob into the children. And so for the most part, it's dealing with Joseph himself specifically, but obviously the interplay and the interaction between Joseph and his brothers is core to the remainder of the book of Genesis. And here, at the beginning of this week's reading, at the beginning of chapter 37, is where we get the first time that the Bible uses the term jealousy at all. It has come up already. One could say that the Cain-Abel relationship situation story has a factor of jealousy involved. Is certainly true. Certainly stories later on in the Bible are versions of jealousy, whether we're talking about Korach and how he feels about Moses and Aaron and their role in their leadership space in the Jewish people and the people of Israel. It certainly comes up a lot. And it's such a power emotion. And we know that from the story of Joseph and his brothers, the impact that that jealousy has. And so let's take a look first at the Bible portion here, and then we'll delve a little bit further into jealousy, what Shakespeare called the green-eyed monster, in discussing it and describing it in Othello and his venge and his anger and his rage towards the possibility that Desdemona loves another. It is one of the two times that Shakespeare uses the term the green-eyed monster. In the other case, he's actually talking more about envy than he is jealousy. But here, it is jealousy. And so what we have is that Jacob has determined to settle the land. He's looking to live out the rest of his life and his days in the land of Israel with his family. And the story then of his boys perks up. And so it is that Joseph, 17-year-old son, starts to tell tales and spin tales about his brothers. Jacob loves Joseph from among the boys. He makes him the Technicolor dream coat, right? The term, that beautiful coat that separates him, distinguishes him from among the others. And then the brothers start to see what's going on. They're not little children, but even little children sometimes pick up on this stuff. They really sense what's going on. If Joseph is 17, then his brothers are all older than him. Then they're minimally 18 and above, right? So then they're late teens and into their 20s at already this point, except for Benjamin. And so they see this. And the verse 4, it says that they hate him. They couldn't speak to him. They couldn't speak peace to him. They couldn't converse with him. They hate him. And then in verse 5, it seems that Joseph only stokes it further by telling them that he had a dream. The truth is, he could have said anything probably at that point, and it would have stoked it further. But the reality of it is that simply by telling him that he has a dream, before he even tells them what the dream is, they hate him even more. And then in verse 8, after he tells them the dream, the brothers are even further angered by what the dream implies, that he's going to rule over them, and they hate him over the dreams. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. It's a downward spiraling staircase situation. It's getting bad. It's really, really bad. The second dream, he comes and he tells them the second dream. And so here at least Jacob makes an attempt to stymie, to mitigate, to stop what's going on by saying something to Joseph, maybe even saying it harshly to Joseph, to being angry with Joseph about these dreams and hoping to stem the tide, which is just turning and taking with the brothers and Joseph. And it doesn't work. By verse 11, their hatred seems to morph now into something else. It goes from hatred to jealousy. Now, both are obviously terrible negative emotions, and both can have, perilous consequences. And in this case, the combination of the two is what we know happens next, which is the selling of Joseph down to Egypt. And leaving out the larger biblical context of the idea that the people of Israel are ultimately going to be strangers in a strange land, and focusing in specifically on the story here, it doesn't necessarily have to go that way. It does. And so the jealousy leads and breeds the next part of it. There seems to be no way out of it for the brothers. The verse 11 tells us that they were jealous of him. Multiple commentaries seem to imply that why are they jealous of him now? Why weren't they jealous of him before? Why isn't there jealousy earlier in the story? Because what's happening now is that perhaps, as Malbim says, and Or HaChaim HaKadosh says, the Or HaChaim, the commentary, says the same idea, and the Netziv seems to say similarly, that with the second dream, the idea that Joseph is going to rule over the father as well, that Jacob himself is going to bow down to Joseph, they sense that this isn't just a dream, that there's a kernel, that there is a piece of truth here, because even Joseph wouldn't say that. And so at this point, jealousy enters the picture. And it's not just hatred. Jealousy enters the picture now because jealousy isn't simply the idea that you have something that I want. It's much more relational. It's more typically speaking a three-partied situation as opposed to a two-partied situation. The difference here is, whereas envy typically is described as we lack something that somebody else has, someone's enjoying something, something has a skill, they have a possession that we want, that's envy. Jealousy is in relation to something that we really already possess, typically speaking, some sort of a special relationship, and that's threatened by a third person. And so here, the brothers have some sort of relationship with the father. They have a relationship, let's say also to extend it with God. And Joseph is now impinging on that, and that's where jealousy comes in. It's not simply that he has the coat, being the coat itself would be an envy. Jealousy is in the relationship. So it's the third party piece with respect to how it's impacting the family. And that's what leads them down the rabbit hole and into the actual pit and selling Joseph down to Egypt. And so what we have here is the ultimate in jealousy. Now, what's key to understand and appreciating is that at its core, jealousy is a very powerful and very dangerous attribute and something that is quite destructive. Whereas envy is a little bit different with respect to an object. Jealousy is really much more about a person. We often confuse the two, and we ask people, when they're jealous, what they're jealous of, they'll more often than not describe an envy event. They'll look at somebody else and say, well, he or she has X and Y and Z, and I want that too. That's really envy, not jealousy. So we confuse the two, but it's really important that we sort of focus in on it because they do admittedly travel together, jealousy and envy, but really to zero in and to zoom in on the jealousy aspect of what's going on here. But I want to show you really one key insight with respect to jealousy. And ultimately, the cure for jealousy is connection. A great article in Psychology Today on the subject is the ability to connect or to reconnect or to establish the connection that seems to be breaking is the key to the cure for jealousy. In the story of Jacob and Jacob, Joseph, and the other tribes, we could have discussed this week as well with a lot of the communication breakdown, which we've discussed in other weeks. There's clearly some sort of communicative issue at play here as well between them all. But at its core, it seems to be that a real key to affecting change with respect to jealousy is connection. Had the brothers approached, not Joseph perhaps, maybe they couldn't do that. Had they bridged the gap back to Jacob about what was going on here? Maybe that the possibility that one of the matriarchs, maybe Leah steps back into this picture, although she has a complex relationship with Jacob as well, to mitigate some of the very heavy emotional feelings that are existing here. Look, Joseph's life is not easy. His mother has passed away. He's very young amongst the group. His now has this affection with his, the affection of his father. That's not easy to manage. He doesn't help the situation, but maybe there's sort of, a moment where they can have a communal conversation, a family conversation around the table, and they can work this out, and they don't. And the jealousy and the hatred are internal, and jealous feelings, and you read the literature, jealous feelings are one thing many of us, in fact, probably all of us have some form of jealous feelings on occasion. It's really more the jealous behaviors, which are the danger. The jealous feelings lead to the jealous behaviors, and that's when things start to really unravel. So connection is really the cure for jealousy, and it's really important that we appreciate that. In a situation where a person is sensing or is feeling jealousy, it's important that they communicate that. They really fess up, own it. When the relationship, it's really important to speak to the person who you're having this sense of jealousy feelings about, sort of fess up. I'm feeling a little insecure in this. I'd feel better if we firmed up certain things here in this relationship. That helps manage the jealousy. It doesn't get rid of it completely, but it helps manage the jealousy. And then the reality is that jealousy is a stress response. Like you're feeling anxious, you're feeling maybe insecure, you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. There's a lot of things that are going on internally, emotionally, and certainly all the psychotherapists and psychologists out there who listen would have more to say on the subject. But managing that stress, figuring out a way to sort of, peter down or to bring down the level of the stress that the green-eyed monster is bringing, a little bit of self-care and just whatever it is that you would do would really help. Asking that person for some sense of reassurance, saying, look, I'm feeling a little bit jealous right now, like really honest about it. Can we talk about that relationship that you have with that person in connection to our relationship? It's important that if you're the person in that, to really be empathetic and to really listen, to not mock or dismiss the person's sense of jealousy unless it's getting out of control and out of hand. But also it's important to really know your limits, right? So I can just do so much with how jealous I feel, and I can work on it, and I'm going to work on it, right? But if I can get something from you, if you can reassure me, if you can, check in here and there, let me know how you feel about me. If it's, again, relationship-related matter, then it really can help the person cope, really can help the person begin to deal. It's not an easy thing to work on, but it is something that we can really make the effort to do. When a person is feeling jealous, it really comes from a sort of a very deep place. There's no question about it. It could be something sort of low, they have sort of a low self-esteem. They have sort of, as some of the articles describes, this idea about a hidden image, how they view themselves. And therefore, when the jealousy erupts, it plays right into that hidden image of themselves and how they think about themselves. With respect to the brothers, it might simply be the idea that they think that they are, in fact, inferior on some level to Joseph. The idea that over the course of generations, they're looking back and they're seeing that Abraham chose Isaac over Ishmael and that Isaac chose Jacob over Esau, and now Jacob is choosing one over the others, and they might feel like, okay, the rest of us are beneath that. That's obviously not a healthy place to be, but that can be mitigated, that can be worked on, that can be discussed, that can be talked about, that can be fixed ultimately. So there's a lot of things that go into why that is. They're looking, some of the literature describes the idea of comparison, that sense of I'm comparing myself to you. I don't have the Technicolor coat. I don't have the eye of my father. I am not the youngest son in this situation. I didn't lose my mother, thankfully, right? So all of those things that we begin to fixate on the comparison potentially leads to the idea that we are lower, we are less, and also creates sort of our reaction, sort of the anxiousness, the stress, brings up the notion of the jealousy. And admittedly, like we see in a lot of places, some level of jealousy for most of us is very, very normal. It's when it sort of gets out of hand, when it gets out of control. It leads to very controlling or dangerous or even abusive behaviors, is obviously when it becomes a problem that's almost very difficult to manage at that point. But it is something that can be worked on. Again, ultimately, the key to it, at the core of it, and the success of being able to really work on it is connection. Really connecting. There seems to be a disconnect between Jacob and his sons, while there is a connection between Jacob and Joseph, and there's a connection among them, among the 10 of them, right? Benjamin being too young, Joseph being the one on the outside, but internally, the collective group never really draw completely back together until many, many, many years later, and by that point, so much has gone on. And so this is where jealousy comes into the picture. It's not an accident that in the Ethics of the Fathers, in the 4th chapter, paragraph 21 in the Mishnah there, it says that Rabbi Elazar HaKapar said the following: 3 things take a person out of the world: jealousy, lust, and honor. The jealousy is one of the things that ultimately takes a person out of the world, because, as it's explained in one of the commentaries on the subject called Yain Levanon, that the jealousy eats at you. It's internal to you. It does manifest itself in behavior, often to the point where people are not aware as to what the core of that behavior is, but it eats at you, and it eats away at you, and it's there, and you're seeing it, and it's only building on that hidden image of yourself, and it's only making it worse, and it's only, pounding and compounding it further and further, the idea that I am less than, that in comparison I don't belong, I don't deserve to have what I have, typically without evidence, and so that's where it goes. And so it could have been the case that maybe that Jacob and Joseph and the brothers could have avoided and mitigated the situation. Ultimately, it would have gone down to Egypt in another fashion, but that the jealousy is at the core of it. And we can see how far jealousy goes and how dangerous jealousy actually is, and how much better our life could be if we're able to manage the emotion, manage the stress, begin to see at the core, at the root, as to why we feel what we feel, where we feel what we feel in our bodies and in our minds, and to do the work. These are serious subjects and serious matters, the negative side of us perhaps more than other things, but it's important that we do the work. Just like every other subject we've discussed till this point, so is the case with jealousy. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Looking forward to next week being back home and doing Coaching with the Bible with you next week, live from the Holy Land. Have a great weekend. Those of you celebrating, Shabbat Shalom.